In every generation, a rare few rise, not just to lead companies, but to shape entire industries. Not just teams, but movements. Welcome to the League of Extraordinary Leaders East Africa, where vision meets courage and strategy sparks transformation. Hosted by Uganda's leading business journalist, Muhereza Chamtetera. This is your front row seat to the minds reshaping the future of African business.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time you're watching and where you're watching from. My name is Cham. I'm the host of LXL East Africa. That's the League of Extraordinary Leaders, where we get to have conversations with some of the leaders that are doing great things. We get to have raw and filtered conversations. And like they say, hearing it from the host's mouth in terms of what drives them and, being able to understand the challenges they go through, how they face them, and how they lead these organizations. With me here today is the CEO of one of the leading banks, and certainly, is it one of the oldest or the oldest?
The oldest bank.
Yeah, the oldest bank. And we are still on the 7th floor of the Standard Chartered Bank building with Mr. Sanjay Rugani. Those of you who like to follow LinkedIn online, I'm sure you've seen him sharing lots of things and engaging with audiences. And I would like to start from there, Mr. Sanjay. You've just been in Uganda only for 3 years.
Correct.
And I know that before you came, I used to follow you on LinkedIn when you were back in Tanzania. But anybody who doesn't know you would think you've been here for 10 years. You come in, you fit in so well and own the space. It's not uncommon to see you, in various gatherings. How do you do it? In Uganda, they say uchikolotia. What drives you?
So I think Uganda has been amazing. It's been great to be here for the last 3 years. The reality is that my general ambition is to experience Uganda. And the more I experience, the more I become part of it. And I believe that, media colleagues like yourself have done a good job in, making everybody appreciate that I've been around for 10 years. But so what drives me? I think very importantly that leadership is a big opportunity. And I'm very privileged to be the CEO here. And like you said, the oldest organization. In fact, globally, we are just over 170 years old. So we've always been bold. We've been loud. But in the areas that we feel that we have value to add. So my last 3 years have been much more driving value in Uganda, making sure that the bank assumes or continues to assume the leadership where, we can make a difference in essence. But like I said, Uganda has also been amazing. Great people, amazing talent, good food, color, and there's just so much about Uganda. So every day is a new journey, a new opportunity. I don't think I feel like 10 years yet, but I'm happy that that is what you see. Thank you.
Okay, and when you came in, I had the pleasure of interviewing you, I think, within your first 3 months here.
Yes.
You had lots of expectations and great vibes about Uganda. Has Uganda lived up to those expectations, or there's a few things lacking?
So I think, first of all, I am very privileged to be an African myself. I'm a Tanzanian, as you know.
Yeah.
When I came to Uganda, I had a lot of expectation. Has everything been the way that I had envisaged? The answer is no. Has Uganda lived up to an expectation? So in many ways, yes. In some ways, no. So let's talk about what I'm very excited about. We're now talking about a 10-fold GDP growth strategy. That's very exciting. I've always thought that Uganda should be in that zone. So I think that's exciting. I've always thought that Uganda should continue to transform from a banking sector. So talk about sustainable finance, the whole digital economy, really about financial inclusion. You can see the different products that are happening. You can see the financial integration that's happened in the economy. You can look at the 5-year development plan. the value add that His Excellency talks about. You can see with the chaos around us in many ways what's happening in Congo, South Sudan, and other markets. Uganda has really been able to establish itself as a leader from a national hub perspective. You can see that the parish development model has now progressed. So that's very exciting. So there's lots of positive things that are happening. So where do I see the challenge? I think for us to have remarkable growth, there are some fundamental things that we need to invest in. Infrastructure is very big. I mean, today, you know that moving around is not easy. It's very complex. So that's one. Two is I think education needs to evolve. So there's a big opportunity there. It's not just Uganda, but I think in Africa, it's much more a bigger opportunity.
Yeah.
I believe that whilst we've made remarkable progress on technology, particularly fintech, mobile, digital transactions, the opportunity on technology is just scratching the surface. You know, we can actually expand the economy by 10x, 20x, and maybe much more if we become more smarter and structured on the technology space. I also believe that we've got a very different role in terms of job creation. We've got to be smarter. This economy has a lot of talent. Look at how many talent are moving out. So I see that's the other opportunity. But hey, look, if you look at macroeconomic indicators, Uganda has been spectacular. You know, the last 10 years, stability has been amazing. Foreign currency, GDP growth, looking at just general risk management has been very good. You look at industry growth, you look at the fast-moving consumer good market, you look at telcos, you look at manufacturing. In all sense, we've seen robust growth. It's not gone without risks that we take. You know, it's very interesting. Before this conversation, one of the conversation we had was that you want to create good stories, that you have this urge that we have too many stories around us that drain the energy. Why don't we continue to create good energy? So one thing that I believe Uganda has to do better is to control its narrative. There are so many good things, but look at the newspapers, the stories around it, the global view about Uganda. It could be much more positive. And I think those are the opportunities I see. But what a brilliant opportunity, and Uganda has been amazing.
Okay. And you happen to be in the driving seat of, I mean, Standard Chartered is the DSIB, you know, one of the, I think, six most important banks for this economy. And you're in that seat where you get to drive the direction in terms of resource allocation, where you choose to put money in the areas that you choose to fund. Maybe give us a perspective in terms of what are some of the areas where you guys are paying a lot of focus, and how are you plugged into those opportunities to make sure that you accelerate them?
That's a very, very good question. So first of all, I think over the 113 years we've been in existence,
Okay.
Standard Chartered is recognized for being different. There are many things that we do very, very differently. But since you've asked me where are we, where am I plugged in, where do I spend my time to drive that big value? As an organization, we have a very bold strategy. We have two sides of the business. There is the corporate side of the business, we call it corporate and investment. And then there is the retail side, which we call wealth and retail. On the corporate side, the big one word that we use is we are a cross-border bank, which means we take Uganda to the world and we bring the world to Uganda. That's a very bold statement, and I'll unlock it a little bit more or unpack it. On the wealth and retail, it's really about creating value or wealth, which is the big thing. So it's really around affluent banking. You know, and Ugandans have so many affluent individuals. But underpinning both is sustainability, which means in long term, it's about value creation. So as a bank, where are we spending time? If you look at the tenfold GDP growth ambition, if you look at the 5-year development plan, if you look at the business ambitions, so we are very plugged into the government priorities. You know, this is financing some of the largest transactions that Uganda has. We're very plugged into supporting industrial investment. So growing the manufacturing base, value add as we talk about it. We're very involved in driving financial inclusion. We are a bank that really is very proud with our technology infrastructure, digital banking. This is where we shape up the whole future of banking. On the corporate bank and side, we have something called straight to bank, which is hugely integrated into the ecosystem. And it's probably the best platform Uganda has had from a payments perspective. We are also investing so much more in the microfinance organizations, in the insurance companies that are driving wealth products. We are investing in all the global, in global subsidiaries. We call them multinational businesses. With every GDP growth that we have seen, there's a lot much more international investment coming into Uganda. And we play a big role in ensuring we support that growth. It could be from a financing perspective, it could be from a risk management perspective, it could be from a platform perspective. We also do trade, we do hedging, we do syndicated transactions or loans, as you can call them. So the focus is really not to be on a crowded market. We bring very different value, which kind of gives Uganda the potential to leapfrog into a different dimension. So future is going to be all about technology. We will enable much more robust technology because it allows much more dynamic growth to happen. Our future is going to be much more risk management. The world is very chaotic at the moment. We see volatility is going to continue to grow. And we have a huge role to make sure that our clients don't fail. And that's a big thing. We have a big role to create capital and liquidity. If you think about a 10-fold GDP growth moving from the $53-54 billion GDP to a $500 billion, it will require very unique capital flows. And banks like Standard Chartered, are really privileged to be in that position where we can bring global investors to invest. So infrastructure is big. We've been very fortunate. We are a huge investor in Uganda's future from that perspective. So be it roads, water, electricity, basic infrastructure, technology, big opportunities. We see industries like cement, steel, fast-moving consumer goods as big enablers. So trade is big for us in essence. So that's where I spend my time.
Growing up as a junior young man, I used to think that the CEOs are people who just sit in offices and attend cocktails and have fun, and until I became a small CEO myself. And there's something you mentioned that one of your responsibilities is to make sure that your clients don't fail.
Yes.
Yeah, which is a very huge responsibility. And I can imagine being one of the most important banks we have in Uganda. You carry a lot of people's futures, if I could say, by just one decision like this, you could change for the good or for the bad certain entities out there. It's such a big responsibility. How do you carry that with you every day and still be able to sleep properly? What are you coping? How do you cope?
I agree. I think the CEO's role is amongst the most exciting ones and very dynamic. And it's got its challenges. I call the challenges as opportunities. So I think the way that a CEO operates, and it's strange, but you will see that every CEO is different. You're very different to me. And in Africa, we don't have schools that nurture CEOs. So there's a lot of learn on the go kind of things, which is important. So what's my model? I think first of all is to have the right principles around leadership. If I have to share the principles around leadership that I have, I think first of all, there's no day in life that I'm not grateful for the privilege I have to be a leader. Leadership is not a popularity game. It is about making sure that you are accountable to many lives, like you said. I'm accountable to lives that are working in the organization, to a group, to our clients, our stakeholders, to society, then you've got to understand that it's about adding value. In everything you do, you have to make sure that you are constantly adding value, which is very important. So my one principle is that make sure that humility and humbleness drives this. It's about serving the relationships. So service is the most critical. I have to practice that. And for me, that's part of my DNA. That's what I was taught from childhood. The second thing is really about people. Whatever work we do, I keep saying that, yes, I'm the CEO of a bank, but I'm actually in the business of people. I have to make sure that our staff continue to see bigger dreams and bigger ambitions. And my role as a CEO is to enable that. That is why in our bank, they don't call me the chief executive officer, they call me the chief enabling officer, which is very unique. But people is beyond staff. It's about the relationships we have. It's about the clients. So in every relationship, how do you help that relationship to scale up, to be more enabled? That's the second big thing. The third thing about leadership is you have to walk the talk. You know, you take accountability, you nurture the success of the organization, you drive the direction, you communicate ruthlessly, you make sure that your stakeholders understand you, help the organization build trust, which is very, very critical. But it's also about clarifying your journey, your model. Your business model is very different to ours. Even in the banking sector, our business model is very different to others. So that constant requirement to clarify so that your stakeholders understand you and then you win together is important. And the last thing is really, and this is what Standard Chartered Bank brings into your DNA, is really, it's about winning. It's about winning with the nation. It's about winning with the communities. It's about winning with our stakeholders. It's absolutely winning with our clients. And it's about winning with staff. Now, winning may also mean that sometimes you take the hard decision, what you don't do, rather than what you do. And I think with many years of experience, as leaders, like you have learned the art, I've learned the art, and it's exciting. It's exciting. It doesn't beat, I mean, what I also want to say is that it doesn't mean I don't have challenges. And you will know that many times when you are as a CEO, you actually are very lonely. So one of the ways I nurture myself is I have a lot of CEOs that I collaborate with, you engage with. First of all, being part of a group, I benefit from that. But also have friends like yourself, where we can brainstorm about leadership and continue to evolve. Yeah.
And speaking about brainstorming and engaging with with your conclave of other CEOs, and I know that you also sit on a number of boards, and probably of course there could be a conclave of other Standard CEOs, and
Yes.
you have conversations. In all these things, when you reflect, what are some of the conversations that are coming through, both in terms of the good things that, especially about Uganda, about Africa, the positive vibes that they are getting about, but also in terms of the fears, what are some of the concerns that they have that they think need to be addressed?
Yes. So I do want to say that I'm, again, privileged that I sit in many governance forums. I chair the British Chamber of Commerce in Uganda. When you talk about leadership, I am part of the YPO, which is a Young President organization. Globally, we are about 36,000 leaders, which are part of these forums. And then I'm definitely part of the banking sector. We call it the Central Executive Committee. So sitting with the banking industry champions and discussing about the future of the financial services sector. And then, of course, I sit on a few other boards from a group perspective, which is very important. So what are big things that we are talking about? I think this is a very fundamental question. So at the moment, leadership is really being challenged. We all sit in a fog of uncertainty. So constantly, there are things that we are clear about, but we are also unclear about. You can wake up today morning and we talk about tariff, Trump, technology, transactions, transit, because goods are moving in different ways. So there's a lot of uncertainty in this world. So one is having that. Number two is that we operate in a world where we are dealing with different generations. And you can imagine Uganda is a very young country. And with youth come a lot much more ability to change. So our clients are changing at a much more dynamic space, their behaviors, their habits, their demands. So keeping up with pace to meet their demands is big. I'm sure even as you are writing or you are editing or you are communicating, you have to constantly think about your reader is constantly evolving. And linked to that is also that your reader is constantly, and like us, is living in a polluted world. There's so much information. So how do you make sure that they create time for you? Which means you have to drive value. You have to respect them. You have to communicate with them. You have to engage with them. So we are constantly living in this world of pollution, and then you have to break through and win. As bankers and surely as other leaders, we're also living in this world of ruthless transparency. Everything I do or I say is being scrutinized. So I need to make sure that we create that transparency from the onset. Leaders are very challenged with the whole area of regulations. In fact, we are in a hyper-regulation space. There's just so many new policies that are coming up. If you look at Uganda, central bank policies, FIA policies, capital markets policies, just environmental policies that we have. The municipal guys are coming with new policies. So you are constantly battling to catch up with all these policies. Then let's not underplay technology. Technology is a huge enabler, but a big disruptor. Somebody sitting in the garage, and we were talking about your office, somebody sitting in a garage can disrupt our business models. So constantly being agile, taking good decisions, disrupting yourself before being disrupted, is a big thing about leadership. The war for talent, is becoming big. If Uganda wants to outpace, and we are talking about a tenfold GDP growth, think about the talents that we will require in Uganda and in Africa. And that means we need to scale up the leadership ambitions, which also means investing in leadership, academic learning, leadership experience sharing. So that's a big part of. So these are things that are keeping us fairly occupied. And within that, we are driving our business. So we have to run. I think the other thing that is big, and Chams, you will know this, is we are constantly being challenged to leave a legacy whilst we are moving so fast. It's not that you pause, then you build something. No. Whilst you are moving, you're starting to create legacy. The reputation you build, the number of lives you are changing, the products you are delivering, the value you are delivering, the investment you're making in community. How are you sharing good value outside? So yeah, it's an exciting world, is what I would say.
That, you mentioned something whereby you have to keep running while organizing everything. Meaning that probably one hand has to be in front and behind.
Correct.
Sort of things,
Correct.
Which requires some bit of delicate balancing. Have you evolved your personal style in terms of how do you, and I like to call it staying sane in the first lane, like in terms of how do you make sure you organize yourself and be able to function at all levels? Because remember, you when you go to these boards, when you come here, when you go home, when you go back, to your to your home country, people still expect you to function fully. How do you balance and actually survive?
Yeah. So I must say, first of all, I have been uniquely blessed that I was born in Tanzania and nurtured by very dynamic parents. So as I grew up, there are behaviors that I have picked up. The behavior of community, collaboration, participation, faith, hope, but great values. one behavior you need to have is what is the value system with which you will live. And if you look at Standard Chartered Bank, we are having three values that we are anchored on. The first one is really around, better together,
Yeah.
which means it's all about collaboration. It's about working with our group, working with our clients, working with our ecosystem. So one habit is that you are not alone. Always constantly think about what should be the voices or what should be the decision metrics that, and what should be the people that should be involved for you to make sure that this is really right. So that is one. The second thing is really around never settle, which is our second value. And never settle is we are in a very dynamic world. And I told you what are things that are in leadership. So it's also continuing to be curious, continuing to learn, continuing to make sure that you listen, you listen, you listen. There's so much more about listening, by the way. We have this philosophy of listening to the sounds of the river. How is the music changing, the river music, and being very attentive to it. So that's a big part of the equation.
Okay.
The third thing is we talk about getting it right first time, which means that getting the right information initially before you take a decision. Who should you empower to make the decision? I may not be the best person. Many times you meet my colleague Cynthia. Her outlook about how we communicate and reach society and community is very different to myself. In your own organization, I see Liz, who's your general manager. And the way she, sometimes provides her own thoughts are very relieving for me. They are like very nurturing. And in many ways, it's really about empowering, like you do. I empower the right people to take decisions. So these are non-negotiable behavior.
Yeah.
And then in a space of constant change, is also being aware. What is disrupting you every day? Whether it's technology, whether it's client behavior, whether it is the global decisions, whether it is regulations, there's something constantly disrupting you. So one behavior I have, committed to is to constantly drive my awareness, which is very important. But the final thing I must say is about taking strategic bets. You have to have it in yourself. After so many years of being nurtured, it's about what bets are you taking today that are going to give you that scale, and create your own legacy. Yeah.
Okay. And let's talk about people. When you look at people who are, and I mean, you could look at Tanzania, at Uganda, but also speaking to your colleagues, when you look at the talent pipeline that is coming in, especially the fresh people, are they, up to scratch? Maybe if you compare like 10 years ago, is it changing for the better or for the worse? And related to that, there's the issue of managing Gen Z's, younger talent. I've had many CEOs say these guys, and there's diverse of opinions. Some people, depending on which industry, some people are saying these guys are great. We just need to hear them out. Others are saying, oh, those guys, unfortunately, they're all we have. We have to work with them. And so I would love to know your experiences, and then also how that connects to the way you're, and I know you're very passionate about family and parenting and nurturing your kids. And for me as a parent, I get to worry a lot seeing the issues we have with talent and skill.
Correct.
I'm torn between whether I need to keep my children in school, whether I need to put them onto AI classes, and the other day I was talking to my wife and she said, no, I think let's first wait. Let's first keep it where it is, and then as we monitor the situation, what is your feelings and insights on that broader people question?
Okay, so you're raising a question around people, but you're also helping me focus on the youth side of the
Yes,
equation.
yes.
So, and you talked about talent 10 years ago and talent now, what are we seeing? So let's start from the family equation.
Yeah.
And I've learned that even though I constantly want the best for my kids, I don't know what the best means for them.
Yeah.
It could be very different. And you may try all your formulas to say, should they be in an AI class? Should they learn this? Should they do this? The reality is that we can't control how the world is going to shape them in the real world. So doing the best means with your knowledge today, what kind of, I think what I focus on and what I would encourage parents to focus on is what are the foundational skills that you need to make sure your children are embedded with that are going to help them to be resilient, that are going to help them to win, that are going to help them to continue to nurture themselves, you know? And those are really around values, talk about culture, talk about, good and bad, how do you make those decisions? I also feel that when you are upbringing your kids, you are an African boy like me, we have never been taught to tell about our failures. But it's important to share your failures so that they can learn from it. Practicing vulnerability is very critical with our children because otherwise they think that you can't be vulnerable. And when they feel vulnerable, they can't communicate to you, which is important. Let's not forget that thanks to even leaders like yourself, that we have a physical identity and a digital identity. And helping kids to understand that how do you nurture your physical identity and your digital identity is very, very crucial. So these are foundational skills. The ability for your children to continue to embrace technology. It's not a to do, it's a must to do. And staying ahead of the game is critical. But also helping them to understand the value of relationships. Many times you may have the best thoughts, the best ideas, but if you don't have the best relationships, you can only go limited far. It's when you have the right ecosystem you have created, your own thoughts and ideas and your decisions can have a far-reaching impact than others. So that is how I practice parenting.
Yeah.
I must also confess that I'm not a perfect father. In fact, we are not all perfect human beings. I'm sure if you ask my kids, they will have a different opinion. But very blessed that they are two successful kids. My son is a climate engineer, and my daughter's just finished public health, and she started masters last week. So that's very exciting. Now talking about talent, I think that in Africa, where the world is moving at the pace at which it is moving, we have a lot much more work to do when it comes to harnessing talent. And that starts from the basic of curriculum. We have a society model. So what kind of teachings and learnings our society bringing into the kids are also going to be critical. Looking at opportunities rather than challenges. We are constantly cribbing about challenges, whereas the world is looking at Africa as an opportunity pot. So how do we then drive those opportunities? My big encouragement to friends like yourself who are in the media space or into education space, let's talk about Ugandan leaders. Today, if I go out and say, tell me who are the top 20 Ugandan leaders, do you know how many diverse views I will get? But we can talk about Elon Musk and Bill Gates and all these global leaders. So how do we consistently have, that aspect of what is Ugandan? And we celebrate it more because Ugandans need local role models, which is a big part of the equation. The quality of talent is very varied depending on how the talent has been nurtured. I think there are different education philosophies also. There is the British curriculum that we all still follow, or we call it the national curriculum, or Cambridge as we call it. But then there is the IB side of the learning. What I've seen is IB is more nurturing. These are more dynamic leaders who come in, or youth that come into play. But it's a lot much more about upbringing, society, foundation skills is what I would say. When a talent joins Standard Chartered Bank, I think we really scrutinize the talent. A talent has to go through maybe 6, 7 levels of review or interview. So we make good choices is what I say. But if I look at general youth, do I think Uganda or Africa is doing enough? I would say no. And I say this from my own experience, that it has taken a lot much more for me to expand my personal skills as versus what the education framework or the community framework of Uganda, Tanzania, or Africa could have given me. So I feel that that's a big opportunity for us. Like I said, Standard Chartered is a university.
Mm.
So when you come in here, you don't only start strong, but you really build your muscles every day and build your strength. If you look at the ecosystem in Uganda or globally, I think we're very proud to say Standard Chartered leadership is nurturing many more talent across the nation or across the world.
And I mean, you are CEO, and of course you also sit on different boards, and there needs to be a symbiotic or synergistic relationship between the board and CEOs, and you've had a chance of being on both ends.
Yes.
What are some of the tips or lessons you've learned in terms of how a CEO can work with their board to make sure the organization achieves its objectives, but also as a board, how can the board be able to work with and support the CEO to be able to, make sure you move the organization forward?
So that is a very dynamic relationship, as you know. There are some very basic principles to get this right. I think the first thing is having that clarity. What is the role of the board and what is the role of the CEO? When you start crossing into each other's zones, it is complicated. And unfortunately, that is what happens many times. So that is the first thing, knowing the rules of the game. The second thing is really around building trust. Without trust, no relationship thrives. So, and trust is never built in a day. It is the board's role to make sure that they, build better trust with the CEO. That means the board has to nurture the CEO, has to engage the CEO, has to optimize on the CEO, and also guide the CEO, which is very important. At the same time, it's the CEO's role to make sure that the CEO builds trust with the board, which means transparency on strategy, performance progress, keeping them informed about important strategic priorities or initiatives or new developments. It's about optimizing on the board also. The board has value beyond the boardroom. How do you make sure you optimize on that value, which is very, very important. And optimizing in many ways means kind of, even take their brain power, because they have amazing brain power to create value for the organization. They have great relationships. So to build on that, it's also about having a constant review model. At the end of maybe 6 months, and definitely at the end of the year, having a session of feedback where the board is evaluated, the CEO is evaluated, and having that conscious deliberation. It's not an easy process, but the way you build it into the institutional foundation really helps you to nurture the best value out of the CEO board relationship. But it's also about the board understanding that they empower the CEO, that he's in the seat. So empowering means holding him accountable, him or her accountable. It is also making sure that they have the right goals, they have the right skills in ensuring that those goals will be executed, but also investing not only in the CEO, but the commitments that we make as an organization. So nurturing the CEO in that way. And for the CEO, it's the same job that, the board needs constant development. So the learning curriculum for the board is robust, which meets the organizational foundation requirements or the organizational progression requirements, in essence. So I would say it's not an easy process. The beauty is I've been part of both sides. So that's allowed me to really understand the dynamics in a much more enabling way and build on it. Yeah.
Okay. And if you, for the 2 times we've talked, you keep on mentioning about the national development agenda. If you were sit to address a gathering of CEOs of the financial services industry, of course, every organization has its own strategy, what they want to pursue. And in light of what you feel, how well the industry is supporting the national growth agenda, what are some of the things you tell them that maybe, like, my dear colleagues, this is where we need to do, or this is how much we need to do to make sure that we support the 10 by 10 strategy.
Yes. Um, so I think it's not only to my colleagues as an industry, but this is a big opportunity for all the CEOs, including yourself. So what are some things that I would say? There are some very important business practices that are very critical, first of all. And these are that as leaders, as CEOs, um, the scale for the future that we want to achieve means you have to make investment today. So what are the biggest opportunities? We must invest in talent. The future is not only how we will see it, but I think the talent, having the right talent helps you to scale up that ambition. There is quite a bit of clarity that's coming up in what the tenfold, equation will look like. But how do you unpack every bit will require you to have the right skills, the right talent, the right leadership in the organization. So I would say invest in talent. Number two is technology is going to be one of the biggest enablers. So depending on your industry, think about what technology you're going to really invest in to give you that scale model, which is going to be very critical. The third thing really is about balancing the scenario of being prudent versus being progressive, which means what I'm saying is that you need to know what risks you are managing to make the right progress. Understand the risks that are inherent, but also the new risks that are emerging so that you don't fail, which is very, very important. The fourth area for me is partnerships. The opportunity scale is so big that you can't do it yourself. So, imagine if you want to scale up your business from a media publicity side, you need to think about who are going to be my scale partners. I'm not going to do it alone. So having this ability to build the right relationships, partnerships is going to be very critical. I think it's a time where we need to collaborate with our key stakeholders, which is regulators, because the pace at which change is going to happen, which means we will have a lot many more regulations that will come in. A regulation is good, but it also is very constraining, especially when regulations sometimes are not made by business people. You need to have a good collaboration between good business people and good regulators, so your decisions are nurturing. You can't have an ambition and then a regulation drags you back. So which means you have to collaborate is what I would say in essence. So I think these are many thoughts that come into play. I also want to say that we are living in a global village. What happens elsewhere has a huge impact on what happens in our economy, in our country. So having that ability to have the foresight on what impacts us and what does not. I think finally it's really having clarity of strategy. What will you focus on and what will you not? Every day you'll get new opportunities, but your ability to stay on the path is going to give you the biggest growth. Stay on the path, think long term. It's not short term gains. Short term gains not going to give you that elevation. It's going to be about your ability to constructively build your long term focus and sustain that. And then the last one for me is governance. And you talked about board. Making sure you have the right governance to carry the organization forward is what I would say. So I think these are thoughts I would communicate.
And this is something I'm asking for my colleagues in communications and PR. And last year we did a survey for, about the leading and most admired CEOs. And one of the key insights I picked from is that most CEOs out there are doing great things, but people do not know them. They do not know they are doing great things. So you'd ask, for example, who is in your view, which CEO do you might admire in the insurance industry? People couldn't quite put a name to the CEO, they would just be CEO of company X, And I know that it's something you've been doing from the time you arrived in Uganda and when you're in Tanzania. I think you've been so visible out there in terms of sharing your thoughts, being passionate about the areas you're passionate about, things like, environment, and writing about them. And if you had to share some of the insights and lessons you've learned from, how does it help CEOs, on their career path, and not even just career, but just about everything, being visible and being seen as a passionate expert out there?
I'm sure that there are different thoughts or philosophies around visibility or not being visible. Um, some people want to be very visible internally. Some people want to be visible internally and externally. Um,
Others want to be visible, not at all.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
Those that are not visible internally or and externally, I believe, have short life. Unless they're doing a lonely job. Sometimes leaders do a lonely job. And I know that. For example, the other day I was talking to a leader who is just practicing forensic investigation. So he's doing a very lonely job, but he's doing a remarkable job because his services are so unique, which is very important. But anyway, what would be my thought is, the first thing is whether we like it or not. We have we have a personal brand and a digital brand. Whether we like it or not, we have a personal brand and a digital brand. So when you know it exists, why don't you manage it? So you have to invest for yourself, which is very important. Understanding what's your personal brand, what's your organizational brand, whether it is the physical one or the digital one, is very critical. Number two is, I believe that the more you share, the more you're understood. It doesn't mean you overshare also. You need to know what are the boundaries to share and what not to share. But in this world where there's just so much pollution of many things happening, if you have an ability to share and you are being heard, then that's the right thing to do, which is very important. Number three is, when you put yourself out, you're also very vulnerable to risks. Which means you have to be more authentic, you have to be more transparent, you're going to be scrutinized all the time. But that's the game leaders have to play every day.
Okay. I think two things we are going to have. I think one of the things that the bank is known for is having great customer experience, and I speak this from experience. I think just about last year I opened a digital account, and I've not had to come to the bank for a long time. In fact, as I've just remembered, I have a check in my car that I need to bank. I just forgot it now. In fact, I wanted to ask a question that, other than this branch, where else do you guys have a branch where I can go and bank and bank my check? But just want to see some lessons you learned about about creating the great customer experience. What are some of the tips? And then lastly, in form of like closing remarks, when you're done with your tour of duty here, and possibly wherever else you go, and it's time for you to be redeployed. The other day I was interviewing Francis Kamblege, and he said there's nothing like retirement, it's just a redeployment. What kind of legacy would you want to leave behind, and what steps are you already taking towards that? Yeah. So
Sure.
cool.
So I think the first thing is really around customer experience. And you will know that Standard Chartered is extremely committed to customer experience. For us, customer relationship, customer experience, customer service, customer value is just not negotiable. How do we do this? I think one is we make customers as part of our ecosystem. So decision model has customer very centric to everything we do. And many times the customers are very challenged to bank with us because we have a lot of requirements. They say your requirements are very onerous. But we look at the customer journey from a long-term lens. And we start working on that from the beginning. So you say that, short-term pain is long-term gain. So let's work together. Let's nurture the relationship together, because ultimately it's about celebrating together. For us, customer journey is not about just you opening a bank account. It is about understanding the customer. It is understanding the customer and the motivations of the customer in enabling themselves, and then what kind of support, whether the organization that the customer is leading or the customer's personal ambition. So it's working or collaboration is the big word for us, which is critical. The third thing for us around customer is to have continuous engagement or dialogue. Our demands, our needs are changing. We are constantly evolving. And within the evolution, understanding the customer at different times. So having access to each other is going to be very, very critical. I think the other thing is really also about helping the customer to take the right decisions. Many times our customers come to us and say, I want to do this, and they have a fixed mindset. And we actually tell them, maybe this product is not right for you. We have the skills. So it's really about using the advisory function, giving the customer the choices. Ultimately, the decision is of the customer, but making sure you treat them fairly, you are selling the right product to them. So sometimes we've had to say, sorry, I won't do business with you because the choice you're making, we don't feel that is the right one. The ability to say no is very hard because a customer wants something and you think you're going to make money, but then you say, I don't think this is the right business you should be investing in. So your ability to say no is equally critical. So for us, like I said, customer centricity is connected to every decision that we make. It also means all the investment we make in our organization. So the culture we have at staff level, the discipline we have around logging complaints, the discipline we have around ensuring our technology platforms are extremely trustworthy, reputable. You need it, you're going to get the best service out of it. When we fail, you also communicate. You make sure your client understands that, the intention around your failing sometimes is we live in a very dynamic world, and you may have won 1,000,000 times, but the one time you fail, you take ownership or responsibility. So that is also part of the customer journey, is what I would say. And the customer has to feel us. So every customer that is a Standard Chartered customer, you'll feel us in many ways for what we do for you, for what we do for the society, for what we do globally. We are constantly speaking, we are constantly communicating, but you are constantly, understanding us is critical. So that's really about customer centricity. Your last question to me was about leaving a legacy. So as Sanjay, because this is legacy about me, and as Standard Chartered Bank, I think we are continuing to drive the legacy of Standard Chartered Bank, 170 years, 113 years in Uganda. So the thing that underpins Standard Chartered's legacy is trust. And the thing that underpins Sanjay's legacy is trust. We make every small thing important. And it is when every small thing gets the importance is when you build trust. And when you build trust is when you're leaving legacy, because that's when you're able to nurture that relationship. You're able to access that relationship and scale up. So anything that is unlocked, optimized, enabled is about creating new value. And new value is creating new legacies. So the question that I ask and the bank is constantly asking is, what are the small things that are also important as much as the big things? And how do we create that value? So that is one way of driving legacy in the presence. For me, legacy as a leader is really about creating more champions. Like I said, I'm in the business of people. So there are things that I really like is, to all the leaders I work with, my biggest conversation is, what's your dream? And if I think that their dream is not as big as they should have, then my job is to unlock that dream and make it big. So that's the first thing, is getting to understand the dream, or getting to make sure that the dream is correct. The second role for me, creating legacy, is to do whatever it takes to help that dream succeed. It's not about me winning. It's about my colleagues winning. It's about the organization winning. It's about the society winning, the community winning. It's also, legacy is also about understanding what is your strength, what is the scale of opportunity we have. Standard Chartered Bank is not just about banking, it's about creating an ecosystem. Our brand promise is here for good. Here for good means creating the right value for our staff, for our clients, for our stakeholders, for our community, for nation, for the world. That kind of ambition requires investment. It means you're constantly thinking how you're going to be valuable, and especially differently valuable because this is a crowded market, as you know. So that requires you to be fit, because you can't be valuable if you're not fit, which is so investing in yourself, learning the future skills, listening is very critical, being more transparent, taking the right decisions. But it's also about, influencing. Influencing is very critical. So you see, I've been probably 10 years here, and in my 3 years, it's because I've been very fortunate that I, as an African, see that the opportunities beyond banking. And in many times I've nurtured that, so my ability to support other organizations to grow has been critical. So legacy is about what you're doing now, but legacy is in long term, the amount of champions you create. And that's very critical. So things that outlive you are really the leaders that are continuing to grow and create new value for others, is what I would say.
I think last question. I mean, being in banking, I think you help a lot of people by saying yes to their proposals, but there have been moments where you also have to say no. And I think as a banker, it is as important as how you say no and when you say no as it is when you say yes. In all these your many years of being, in banking and being a leader, what have you learned about the act of saying no? Saying no to people, but still leaving them, still feeling okay and happy. Maybe not necessarily happy all the time, but generally speaking, also the art of giving and receiving difficult feedback.
Yeah, so I think giving and receiving difficult feedback is equally as important as giving good feedback. You know, we call it recognition. Recognition can be good or bad in many ways, and you have to build your muscles. The general society norms, as you know, being born in our part of the world, is we are constantly talking about, we're managing expectations. You are born in a community where you can't say what you really feel. So you're constantly just saying what you think others will like. And then you end up in a bank like ours, and I've been with this bank for 27 years, so it's been great. But I'm also an accountant. So as an accountant, you have learned to say yes or no. I told you that leadership is not a popularity game. It's about doing things right. So I think how do you do that is an art. It's you have to build your muscles to it. Few things that I would say is don't waste your time. Don't waste others' time because unfortunately, stretching expectation is not good. So if it's a no, you do it now. Number two is do it very respectfully. Many times you have to massage the ego, or you have to work with the client so that they don't feel hurt. They may not be happy, but it's about making sure that they don't feel hurt. Ultimately, it's a choice. Sometimes they will feel hurt, but it's about taking time to go through the strength of understanding that you're not misunderstanding the ego of the person. So I would say that a lot of our decisions are discussed at leadership level. So understanding that you don't hurt the ego is very important. The third thing is, not spoiling the relationship. Yes, a transaction can be yes or no, but ensuring that you have huge respect for the relationship and always driving that philosophy that, Chums, I know I'm saying no to you, but you're very important to me. So having that balance in the conversation is very, very critical, is what I would say. So yeah, that's how you build muscles. But what I would say, don't waste your time. Yeah.
Okay. All right, our dear listeners and viewers, you've had it. Leadership is not a popularity contest. It's not for the weak. You have to always constantly build muscles to make sure that you stay in the game and stay in the lead. And thank you very much, Mr. Sanjay Rugani. I think for voicing the very essence of why we built this podcast is to how to help these leaders keep on practicing their muscles by being able to learn from those who are already in the game and swimming in the deep with the sometimes with the sharks, sometimes with the dolphins. Yeah, thank you. Always a pleasure, and thank you for taking up time.
Thank you,
sharing with
James.
us a great knowledge you've gathered, and looking forward to be back maybe another time to tell another version of the story.
Certainly.
All right.
Certainly.
Great.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
So, guys, remember to follow us. You click the subscribe button, follow us for this and more of the greatest conversations. And if you feel there's a leader out there from whom we can learn, or if you feel you're that leader who has lots of insights to share with us, please reach out to us and let's keep building our dear Uganda and the rest of South Africa. See you next time.